All right, today we are jumping into some big and, let's be honest, sometimes uncomfortable ideas: privilege, power, and oppression. But here's the plan. Instead of just talking in circles, we're going to break them down using a really clear framework and a powerful case study from our source material. We're going to see how these huge concepts actually show up in the real world. Okay, let's get into it. So here's our roadmap. First up, we'll look at the two-sided coin of diversity itself. Then, we'll get our vocabulary straight, defining privilege and power. After that, we're going to dive into a pretty startling case study: the opportunity gap in preschools. And to wrap it all up, we'll talk about how we can start to shift the entire way we think about these issues.
Okay, so let's kick things off with this central paradox of diversity. We talk about it all the time as a source of strength, but our source material points out it has this dual nature. It can build us up, but as we've seen throughout history, it can also be used to tear us apart.
Let's start with the question our source poses, and really just think about this for a second. If we didn't have different perspectives, problem solving would just be an echo chamber, right? Research consistently shows that diverse groups are way more creative, they're more resilient, and they're just flat out better at solving tough problems. In a field like early childhood education, that's not just a nice to have, it's absolutely essential. And this right here is the core contradiction. The exact same differences that spark innovation, different ways of thinking, different backgrounds, are the very same things humans have used forever to create division, conflict, and oppression. Things like skin color, beliefs, orientation. It's this tension that makes understanding a concept like privilege so incredibly important.
So, to really get our heads around that tension, we have to make sure we're all speaking the same language. In this next section, we're going to define two really key terms: privilege and power. And not just their dictionary definitions, but how they actually work inside a system. Now, what is absolutely essential to get here is that privilege isn't about you being a bad person or even having an easy life. It's about being part of a system that gives you unearned advantages and choices that other people just don't get based on your group identity. The key word here is systemic, not personal. And, where there's privilege, there's almost always power. We're defining power here pretty simply. It's just the ability to have influence. But as we're about to see, how that influence gets used, well, that makes all the difference in the world.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. This slide makes a fantastic distinction. Power over is kind of what we all think of, right? Using your influence to keep control and maintain the way things are. But power with, that's different. That's about using your influence, maybe even your privilege, to team up with others and actually challenge those systems. And this story just perfectly illustrates what power with looks like. Our source gives this example. A white customer is in a store and she notices something isn't right. She sees the problem. So she uses her position, her privilege, as a customer who will likely be taken seriously to act. And the impact? An employee of color actually thanks her, saying that a complaint coming from her carries more weight. It's less likely to be brushed off. See? She didn't just walk away. She used her power to try to interrupt a cycle.
So that example shows how these power dynamics can play out on a small scale. But now let's zoom out from that one person's action to a huge system-level problem where these dynamics create very real gaps, starting in the first few years of a child's life. Just take a look at these numbers. They're from the U.S. Department of Education. Black children make up 18% of preschool enrollment. Okay, that's our baseline. But they account for almost half, 48% of all the preschoolers who get suspended more than once. The difference there is it's impossible to ignore.
And believe it or not, it gets even more shocking. Research our source cites found that preschoolers, we're talking 3 and 4-year-olds here, were being expelled at 3 times the rate of kids in K through 12. We are kicking toddlers out of school before their education has even really begun.
This brings us to a really critical point about how we even talk about this problem. For a long, long time, the conversation was all about an achievement gap. But that language subtly puts the focus on the kid's performance, which can lead to blaming the child or their family. Shifting our words to opportunity gap puts the spotlight right where it belongs, on the system that's failing to give every kid the same access and resources. And Professor Asa Hilliard just hits the nail on the head here. The real problem isn't something lacking in the children. It's something lacking in the quality of service they're receiving. It's a system problem, not a child problem.
So, okay, if we figured out the problem is systemic, the big question is, how do we change the system? Well, our source material says it has to start with a fundamental change in our thinking. It's what's called a paradigm shift.
So what's a paradigm? Well, you can think of it like the pair of glasses you wear to see the world. It's that set of invisible assumptions that shapes everything, our research, our policies, our actions, and for a long time, the dominant paradigm has been based on deficits.
And here's the issue with a deficit model. It ends up framing entire communities as being at risk. It makes us ask, what's wrong with them, instead of asking, what are their strengths? It pushes us to try and fix people, instead of fixing the broken systems that are putting them at risk in the first place. And this is where the alternative comes in, the culturally responsive, strength-based framework. This whole approach just flips the script. Instead of asking what's missing, it starts by asking what a child already knows and can do. It looks at their culture and their family not as problems to be overcome, but as core strengths to build on. And most critically, it correctly identifies challenges as coming from the system, not from the child. This quote from Kroll just sums it all up, doesn't it? What you look for is what you find. If your entire system is built to find problems in people, that's all you're ever going to see. But if you design it to find strengths and successes, well, you'll find those instead. And that leaves us with the central question, really. This isn't just about schools, this applies to everything. How do we in our own lives, in our own work, make that conscious shift? How do we stop asking, what's wrong with you? And start asking, what are your amazing strengths and how is the system failing to see them? Because that shift in perspective, that might just be where real change begins.